Assalamu alaikum. So today our topic is about the nature of science. So before we discuss about, first we discuss what is science. So science is basically the systematic and logical approach to discover how things in the universe work. It's knowledge accumulation through the discoveries about the things in the environment. So the nature of science means refer to the key principles, some assumptions, values, and practices that are inherent to the scientific enterprise. It explains how the scientific knowledge developed and how it different from the other way of knowing. So there are different characteristics of the science which should be understood before scientific method. So the first characteristics in the empirical test. So by the definition, it's showing that it based on the observation and experimentation. So this should be explained with one of the example, and that this image showing that if the testing of a new medication is effected by randomly assigning the participants in two different groups, the one receiving the drug, which is the experimental group, and one receiving a placebo, which is the control group. So the dependent variable, for example symptom reduction, is measured and compared between these two groups. So this explanation showing that the empirical tests are based on the observation and the experimentation. Second one is the testable test. It's showing that the scientific ideas can be tested and verified. This could be explained with one of the example, that when we place the plant in three different conditions, for example the amount of light the plant receiving in three different timings, the 2 hours, the 6 hours, and the 10 hours per day. So it's showing that the testable test, the ideas can be first tested and then verified. The third characteristic or the type of the science is the falsifiable test. It's showing by the definition that the scientific theories can be proven wrong. So this should be explained with one of the example, that when we take the two groups of the same type of the plant, the group A gets sunlight while the group B is kept in the darkness, for example the control condition. Then we measure their height. After a set of the time, the group A with the sunlight grow taller than group B in the darkness. So it's showing that group A with the sunlight grow the same height than group B in the darkened condition. So this one explains the previous definition, that the scientific theories can be proven wrong. Another type of the scientific method or the characteristics is the objective test. So on the basis of definition, it explains that it strives for the unbiased observation and the interpretation. This we explain with one of the example, that when the tomato plants treated with the fertilizer X, showing a statistical significant increase in the average height compared to the untreated control condition. Another example or the type of the science is the replicable test. So by the definition, it's showing that the scientific finding can be reproduced by the others. So this should be explained with one of the Mendel's primary experiments, which involve crossing the pear plants, which we call the Pisum sativum, that had contrasting traits, such as color picture showing that the seed shape, which may be the round versus wrinkle, the seed color, which are the yellow versus green, the flower color, which are the purple versus white, and the plant height, which are tall versus dwarf condition. So this showing that the replicable test can be reproduced by the others. Another example of the science or scientific methods is the tentative test. So by the definition, it explains that the scientific knowledge is always subject to the revision. So this we explain with one of the example of tentative experiment. A common example is the simple experiment to test a hypothesis about the plant growth. So this image showing that the observation have been show that the household plants grow taller when placed near a window. So then we design the tentative hypothesis that if a plant receiving more sunlight, then it would grow taller. So then we design the tentative experiment. So in the control group, a set of identical seedlings placed in a room with only indirect low light, while in the experimental group, a second identical set of seedlings placed on a sunny window. So the procedures, both the group receiving the same amount of the water, the same soil and same temperature for 4 weeks. The only difference is the independent variable in that case, which is the amount of the sunlight. So after the measurement, after 4 weeks, the average height of the plant in both groups is measured, the dependent variable. So our tentative conclusion was that if the sunlight plants are significantly taller, the hypothesis is supported. However, this conclusion is tentative because a better experiment, for example controlling for the specific light, wavelength, temperature variations near the windows or air circulation may reveal after other factors are at play, or a future experiment might conduct the findings. So this explains our definition that the scientific knowledge is always subject to the revision. Another example of the science one is the explanatory test. So by the definition, it's showing that the science aim to explain the natural phenomena. So this we again explain with one of the example of explanatory Mendel's Spear plant crossing, after called the Mendel's law of inheritance experimentation. This experiment was designed not just to observe the phenomena but to explain underlying mechanism of the heredity. So another example and the type of the scientific method is the predictive test. So the science can make the prediction about the future events. So here we observe this image that showing a predictive experiment is basically a systematic process that uses the historical data, the statistical algorithms and machine learning techniques to forecast a future outcomes, a behavior and trends. So after discussing some of the type and characteristics of the science, now we define the scientific method. So scientific method is a series of steps used to investigate the natural phenomena. So the first step in the scientific method is observation. It basically noticing a phenomena or asking a specific testable question about how something works. Then in the second step, you formulate a question about the observation phenomena, a testable question about how something works. So this one we explain one of the example. So we observe that why are the living room plants taller than the dining room plants. So then on the basis of this observation, we designed our question about why are the living room plants taller than the dining room plants. Then in the third step, is basically designing the hypothesis. So hypothesis is proposing a tentative testable explanation or educate guesses for the observation. It starts with some of the if, then and statements. So in our experiment, we design our hypothesis that if the plants with more light grow taller. So after designing the hypothesis, the fourth one step is the experimentation. So it is basically designing and conducting a fair test to see if the prediction is accurate. This involves manipulating an independent variable and measuring a dependent variable while keeping all the variables or other control. So in our observation, it's showing that growing the identical plants in the high light, for example experimental condition, and low light control condition, keeping water, soil and temperature the same as the control variable. So the fifth one step is analysis. So it basically collecting and interpreting the result of our experiments to determine if the data is supported or refuted the hypothesis. So in our experiment, it's showing that the high light plants grew taller. The hypothesis is basically strongly supported. And the sixth one step is the conclusion. It is basically collecting and interpreting the result of the experiments to determine if the data is supported or refuted the hypothesis. The last and seventh step of the scientific method is theory. It basically published the findings so others can confirm the relationship between the sunlight and the plant growth. So after discussing all the scientific methods and the characteristics of the science and the steps of the science, now we define the scientific method. That the scientific method is not the linear, but the scientists may revisit earlier steps as needed. So the science is the collaborative effort scientists build in each other work. Science is the self-correcting process. Errors and misconceptions are identified and corrected. So now we discuss what are the important of the scientific method. The first important is that it provide a reliable way to gain the knowledge about the natural worlds. Second, it help us to understand the complex phenomena. Third one, it also help us to enable develop a new technologies and solve the problem. And fourth one, it promote the critical thinking and evidence based reasoning. So these are all about the scientific methods, their characteristics, types, steps, and importance. Thank you so much.